So with that, I want to launch back into, believe it or not, the godly marriages, pillars for a godly marriage. You remember that subject? We broached it back in August, and then went to part 2 in September, and now we're about to launch into part 3. And so I want to go ahead and extend this particular series, 3 hours essentially it's grown into, and encourage all of you that once we finish this one, you may want to go back and binge a little bit on the first 2 just to bring yourselves back into context with how this piece of the puzzle will fit into that series. So with that in mind, you may want to keep that in mind as we finish up here. This will be posted in the next week, certainly, or before, and therefore you can kind of put them all together, and when you get time, watch them in series, and it'll, I think, mean a lot more to you. But let me take a moment just to introduce and remind all of us of some of the high points of Part 1 and Part 2. Part 1, we covered 4 major words, if you recall, 4 major words that are very critical to a strong, godly marriage. And that's important. That's the operative, a godly marriage. Those 4 words, I encourage all of you, I'm not going to digress into them because I don't have the time, but I just encourage you to go back on part 1, review that content and those words, do even a Bible study, expand on it more than what was even presented, because there's a lot more depth in those words than what we covered in the presentation of part 1. But with that being said, those 4 words are very, very important because they lay down the fact that marriage is foundational. A good, strong marriage is foundational to families. Without a strong marriage, you will not have a strong family, assuming we all understand what the definition of family is. Family means more than one person. If you're one person, you're single. 1 and 1 is 2. And once you become 2, you've got a family. And then, of course, God willing, if you should be so blessed, thereby, of course, one after another, maybe 1, 2, 3 children. Some have more, but again, that becomes a family. And again, the transparency of that, the connection, the reality, the relativity of that is that's what God is doing. He's building a family. And so in this respect, we understood that that was foundational to strong families, and consequently, strong families are key to strong communities. And strong communities, as you extend that out, become the ingredients for strong nations. That's why families are critical. Healthy families are critical to the overall health of a country. Without a doubt, there's no debate in this. Part 2, we covered primarily 3 key pillars to a godly marriage. And then time ran out on us, and we stopped, and that's where we're going to be picking up here in a moment in point 4, the 4th pillar. But Christians, in that particular part of the presentation, part 2, were told and was presented that we as Christians should stand up for marriage. And what I mean by that is our marriages should be good examples. Why? Because marriage is a godly institution. Your marriages reflect God. And I would think all of us, without question, being Christians of course, want to reflect God properly, want to reflect God proudly, want to reflect the, what you could say, favor of God, so other people can see the happiness you have, and maybe even through your own marriages, be drawn to ask, what do you got going? Why are you guys so happy? Don't you know the world's going to hell in a handbasket? How can you be so happy? You know. But no, we need to understand that we've got to make stands, right stands, good representations and examples of happy families, which comes from a strong marriage. And so in part 2, we kind of covered a lot of that, and we realized that marriages are predicated on a covenant. It is a covenant relationship. It's a covenant partnership. It holds a lot of credibility and responsibility to all involved, and that includes the children. It's not just mom and dad. It includes the children too. The children need to respect mom and dad, as mom and dad need to respect the children. There's far too much abuse going on today, brethren. with children being abused, sadly, trafficked, and all that stuff that goes on in the world we're living in. And that's all due to the fact that marriages, if they're existing even in the relationships where children are involved, are wrong. They're not healthy. And consequently, the families are not healthy. And then the children get abused. Or the husband gets abused. That's right, husbands can get abused by the wife or by the children. Husbands can get abused. It's not just women who get abused. Husbands can get abused also. Emotionally, maybe not so much physically, but emotionally. They can be shut down. They can be told to shut up, sit down, be quiet. I don't want to hear you. A lot of things that women can do to also abuse men. But by the same token, of course, that doesn't dismiss men abusing their wives and their children, sadly. But nevertheless, in part 2, we covered a little bit about the importance of realizing that our marriages are predicated on God's institution of a covenant relationship that establishes, or at least it should lay down the foundation of good, strong families. And again, it goes back to the idea of a marriage being a healthy partnership between the two of them. And it is basically a partnership in that regard, without a doubt. And God intended it that way. And in part 2, we talked about how that original arrangement is God instituted. God never instituted a man to marry a man. He never instituted a woman to marry a woman. And besides that, that's not even a marriage. Only God reserves the prerogative. But we've lost this. Somewhere in the shuffle, we in our society today, here especially in the United States, Canada, you can make a case of it too, in London and so forth, in UK, we've lost the idea of what defines marriage. You can scream at the housetops, I said this before, and claim two guys are married. But they're not. They're not married. What they've got is a civil union in God's eyes. Oh, they're together. They got a piece of paper. They can adopt kids. They can't make them. Two women can't make a child. Two men can't make a child. It's a perversion in relationship, because what is God doing? He's reproducing himself. The very fact of homosexuals in that regard, in not being able to do that, illustrates that it is indeed a misstep. It's a perversion. It's what it is in the relationship. So doesn't mean that they can't be together, because we've all seen that they are together. It's legalized. They can get civil unions accepted. They call it marriage. In God's eyes, brethren, you know it, I know it, is not marriage. Only God can define marriage. And how did he define it? A man and a woman. In the Hebrew, Ish and Isha. He took from Ish a rib, and he made an Isha, a man with a womb. Woman. Because that is what he did. And why? So that the two together can become one and reproduce and replenish the earth. Isn't that what he said in Genesis 1? Of course he did. And that was the underscoring purpose of the relationship, for a man to leave his mother and his father and cleave unto his wife. And those are very important items, concepts to keep in mind as you and I begin to understand the significance of marriage and the importance of it, and the fact that it does reflect a God-ordained institution. I don't care where you were married at. If you were married by a justice of a peace or were married by a minister, if you, being a man and a woman, said, I do, in the faces of witnesses and so forth, you have entered into a covenant with God, and therefore have an unerasable responsibility to make that relationship work. Divorce should not be in a Christian vocabulary, and yet, sadly, we suffer in a lot of cases due to divorce. But nevertheless, we should do the best we can to try to work out our issues and our problems. So, parts 1 and 2 go into quite a bit of detail of that. I'm not going to digress, like I said, into a lot of details regarding it. I suggest you go back and listen to it. Perhaps, as I say, binge on these 3 hours of what it takes to establish these pillars for a godly marriage. But let's launch into pillar number 4. We went through pillars number 1 through 3 in part 2, so now let's launch into pillar number 4. And here it is. Be helpful. Positive reinforcing. This is very important, brethren, because we need to learn how to complement one another. After living together with each other for years upon years, decades upon decades, my wife and I, we've been married now 55 years. It's easy to begin to take each other for granted. You know that as well as I do. Familiarity breeds contempt. It's an old adage, but nevertheless, there's a lot of truism to it. So it's important that we do the best we can to groom the relationship that we've got going with our mate, be we husbands and wives, females and males, to afford the recognition of the one or the other that they are appreciated, that they're grateful, that they're happy. You happy anymore? Are you 55 years? Are you still happy, Margie? You know, I mean, those are important. Those are important actualizations to hear, not just to think, assume, presume. It's nice to hear, you know what? If I had to marry you again, I'd do it all over again. That's nice to hear. You know, you did a good job. Man, you did a good job. Let's get a bottle of wine and celebrate. You know, I mean, these are fun things that we can do to make our marriages come alive and, of course, make them happier environments so that we understand that we are indeed appreciated, that the one is indeed grateful for the companionship, for the help. Remember, I mentioned it's a partnership. It's a partnership in covenant. When you marry somebody, you're in business forever until you die, until death do you part. You're in business together. And consequently, it's important that we do the best we can to come to recognize where the compatibilities are. Give credit where credit is due. Focus on the collective well-being also of the whole family, and this includes the children. They need support. To bring up children in a marriage that's going to be maintained in a healthy way takes work. It takes sacrifice. Just go ahead and neglect the attention necessary to keep everybody in the corral and be happy, well-fed, satisfied is a commitment and dedication oftentimes that is outside of the capabilities and skill levels of the couple that got married, because sadly, we got children marrying children. They're not emotionally adapted yet to it, and consequently have an effect, a negative effect oftentimes on the children because they don't know what to do with the children. So it's so important that we do take the time and recognize that we are indeed very much so responsible for our families, and men in particular are responsible to make sure that their wives are happy, but that doesn't dismiss the fact that wives should make sure their husbands are happy. Chapter 10, book of Proverbs, we read this, and this is important. It's important that we are indeed honest and we're truthful when facing the challenges in a family. And here in verse 12, we're reminded by the writer, hatred stirs up strifes, but love covers all sins. We have basically a statement, a motto, if I can use that term, that underscores the ministry. And the ministry is when in servant leadership, servant eldership. And by the way, a lot of what we're going to talk about, you can extrapolate and extend this out to other relationships outside of marriage. to your friends, to whatever you might be part of in terms of your work, the department that you work in, school, any relationship. Frankly, a lot of these principles we're going to talk about can be applied outside of marriage to any relationship. But the fact of it is, we have this statement that if indeed something comes up, that it is important for you to take this approach. And as I said, this is a motto that we have in servant leadership and have tried to hammer this home in all the ministry. And that is, how can I help you? Real simple. You really messed up. How can I help you? You really blew it. How can I help you? That's tough. I've often said, it's one thing to be a leader. Frankly, a lot of people can be a leader because they think of leadership of saying, look, if you don't agree, there's the door, and don't let it hit you on your way out, kind of a thing. But servant leadership requires talking, communicating, trying to find common ground, to see what can be negotiated. Marriage requires that. There's no means of cutting and running once you're married. When you're married, yeah, okay. Does Margie yell at me? Yeah, she yells at me sometimes. But do I cut and run? No. I might run for a while. Count to 10 and come back for a second dose. But my point that I want to make is that you've got to make the commitment and dedication that we're in this for the long run, man. We're in this for the long run. No matter what happens, sweetheart, I'm here for you. No matter what happens to you, congregation, I'm going to try to be here for you. That's the job of a minister. That's the job of a pastor. It's not easy if you're really going to do it. Oh, it's easy if I get up here in the lectern and have all you people wanting to think that I'm somebody special and, oh, I got all this. Oh, yeah, man, I got this authority. Oh. No, it doesn't work that way. If you're going to really practice what you preach, brethren, your marriages require work and sacrifice. You're not always going to get your own way. And you've got to be willing to find out where that compatibility is. Sadly, too often, irreconcilable differences occur, and in marriages, they don't cover the sins. They actually maliciously exploit them, make them public. Sometimes divorces can be very ugly, very messy, but nevertheless, shouldn't be, because divorce ought not to be in our vocabulary regarding our marriages. Philippians chapter 2, and in verse 3, let nothing be done through strife and vainglory. And in the context of marriage, this is important. Marriage is not a competitive environment. You're not competing with your husband who makes more money than you, ladies, or vice versa. We're not in competition with our children. As the children get older, the father is older, and consequently the sons might begin to, take a bit of more dominance. Hopefully by that time they're ready to move out, but today you've got Gen Z kids and so forth still, living at home, and they're 30, 31, 2 years old, and that happens for one reason or another. But the bottom line here is that don't compete with each other. Marriage should be a mutual partnership, hoping to bring the best out in each partner, each person that's involved in that family that's part and parcel to the outgrowth of that marriage. So he goes on here, the writer does. Paul, and he says, let nothing be done through strife and vainglory, but in lowliness of mind. Let each esteem the other better than themselves. Oh boy, that is a difficult one, isn't it? Especially when you're in a disagreement, or especially when you're under fire, to be humble and try to esteem the one that is perhaps out of order better than yourself. I mean, this is a big demand. And it's not easy to exercise these kinds of disciplines, which is what I'm talking about, is not easy to provide in this kind of discipleship, because that's what disciplines come from. Disciplines are nothing more than discipleship, and it's not easy to be a disciple of Jesus Christ because the disciplines are often really high bar. And some of our natures are just not well suited due to the carnality that we're still dealing with. Yet nevertheless, we're expected in our marriages to be able to work it out. He goes on here, and he says in verse 4, look not every man on his own things, guys, ladies. Don't be selfish in the marriage. Don't always be looking out for you to win the argument. I've got a towel in my office that says, I should have wrote it down. It's really, Margie's laughing. She knows she gave it to me. But it deals with arguments that, the woman always gets the last word in. I got this right. The woman always gets the last word in. And anything thereafter is another argument. Something like that. And Margie gave that to me. But bottom line is, in this case, that we are, and it's very important, that we're not selfish in our marriages, that we do give and take, and we do make sacrifices for each other, and especially, we better get used to it for the kids. Once you start having kids, you know, mom and dad, you know what I'm talking about, parents. You have to be willing to sacrifice. Take them to the ball games, take them to the dance classes, take them, wherever they got to go to do what they've got to do because they're not old enough yet to drive. And we've seen a lot of that, Margie and I have, with our grandchildren. It's just part of the growing stages of families and extended families. And it's always nice to have extended families close so that they can share the burdens of all these responsibilities because, again, there's no question about it, with marriage, responsibilities do indeed grow. And the more you add on to that marriage through children, through having children, the more responsibilities you develop. So over here in James chapter 3, Jesus' half-brother says this, very principally speaking, and it's very important for us to recognize this. He says, in this case, verse 10, and basically this is all about, you hear me say, pick a lane. Matter of fact, I get criticized, I say it too much. Well, but nevertheless, it applies. It applies. You can't be of two minds. As Christians, we're either Christians or we're not. And if you're not, you're canceling out your Christianity no matter how much you want a virtue signal. No matter how much you want people to think that you are a Christian, if indeed you're not acting like a Christian, it cancels out your virtues. Signaling. And what James is saying is very applicable to what I just explained here as a premise. Verse 10, chapter 3, book of James. Out of the same mouth proceeds blessings and cursings. My brethren, this ought not to be. How can you bless and curse? He further illustrates, does a fountain send forth sweet water or bitter? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear an olive berry? Or either a vine fig? So can no fountain both yield salt water and fresh water. It's one or the other. You're either acting malicious, evil, selfish, whatever it may be, or you're not. And whatever way you're acting defines you. Because you are what you do, not what you say. Oh, Jesus is in my heart. I love Jesus. You dirty rat. And that's how people act sometimes. When the door closes and church is out and we go back out to our routines and our tasks, and we are terrors on the job. In our department, oh yeah, we lead our departments. Jay, what'd you do? Where are you, man? Get over here. I want to talk to you. You did this, you did that. That's not servant leadership. And we're all being designed and groomed to be servant leaders in the kingdom of God. And so marriage gives us that platform whereby intimately we can develop the empathy, compassion, patience, love, all kinds of opportunities to be the Christians God wants us to be. And marriage is the perfect laboratory, brethren. It's designed to exercise all the attributes that I hope and pray you are learning through your Bible study, your meditations, your prayers, and your fastings. Because if you're not learning these things, you're missing a big, big portion of the puzzle. And so he goes on, James does, and continues in verse 13, who's a wise man, endued with knowledge among you? Let him show out of good conduct, good behavior, good actions, that his works, his efforts, his toil, his deeds, that's what the Greek means, with meekness and wisdom. You don't take out vengeance on your mate. You don't take out vengeance on your children. If your children need correction, it should be done with logical communication so they know what they did and understand. And maybe, depending on how old they are, come to some kind of mutual agreement of how it's going to be corrected once the problem's identified. And that takes patience. I know I brought up 2 girls. I know how that is. And I had 2 grandsons. I know how that is. So the point that I want to make here is that we have to be really dedicated to do the right things, even if it hurts, brethren. Even if it hurts. Because that's what marriages are all about. And you ought to be able to be lighthearted about it a little bit here and there when times are necessary or when it fits. But he says here, James does, look, let him show out of some good behavior and deeds, works, with meekness and wisdom. But if you have bitter envying and strife in your hearts, don't glory and lie not against the truth. Don't keep fooling yourself that you think you're sweet water when in fact you're sour. Don't think you're fresh water when in fact you're salt water. Don't fool yourself because you're wasting time. You need to recognize the fact that you are not doing whatever you're doing, and it's not right, it's wrong, and you need to change it. And stop obsessing about the problem or trying to find blame, or for that matter, when the argument is over, hold a grudge. I'll never forgive him. He did that. I know that tells me this or that. No. No grudge holding. If you're going to forgive, okay, let's shake, let's kiss, make up, and do what we got to do and go forward in this, because guess what? We've got children to care for. We got to make this work. We got to find some compatibility. Or we've got, in our partnership, a lot of complications. Or whatever it may be that motivates you to make sure you don't cut and run. Brethren, divorce, again, let me say it one more time, should not be in our vocabulary. He goes on and continues, and he says, this wisdom descends not from above, but is earthly, it's carnal, it's sensual, it's devilish. For where envying or jealousies and strife is, there's confusion and every evil work. And there is every evil work in that regard, because that's what results from the confusion due to the jealousy, envy, and or strife that is involved in the relationship. We talked about in part 1 a lot about peace. And that is, again, another underlying objective in marriage. Your marriages ought to be safe places. Your marriages, when you come home from work and dealing with the stresses and the pressures, anxieties that are associated with travel and work and whatever else it might be that you're involved with, when you come home to your mate and your children, and children, you need to recognize this too in respect to your moms and dads, that you need to relax. You need to help them find peace. Because it's not just all about you. Kids have this thing that, well, mom and dad are here to serve me. They owe me. I'm entitled to a good meal every night. Mom, are you cooking? You know, what are we having for supper? Well, why don't you help me? Kind of a thing. Because what is, again, a family all about? Of learning how to take responsibility and share the burdens of family life together and working as a team in that environment, because that's what marriage should be bringing toward and fulfilling and connecting up with and building the family. Verse 17, but the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then it's peaceable. And again, peace is important. It's gentle. It's easy to be entreated. And that means without wrangling, without wrangling. Full of mercy, good fruits, without partiality, without hypocrisy. In other words, again, if you're going to be sweet water, be sweet water. If you're going to be pure water, be pure water. But again, if you're not, you're canceling out. Let me invert it. If I was a crook and a criminal and I'm on the hunt and I'm with my buddies, my thugs, and all of a sudden I've got an opportunity to do a dirty deed against somebody, and I am a criminal, I am a thug, well then guess what? If I don't do what my buddies want me to do, in this case, whether it's rob the person or kill the person or whatever, and I say, no, I'm not going to do that, as crazy as it sounds, I'm being a hypocrite. Because I'm not doing what I normally do. Because I'm a thug, I'm a criminal, and my buddies are depending on me to take care of this business. We need to be people of our word, brethren. We need to be people of our demeanor, true. That's why he says, without hypocrisy. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that make peace. And so it's important that we do the best we can to be peaceful in our homes and to take the responsibility that our families provide us with happiness and with a willingness to make it all work. Last point, point 5, pillar 5, and this is very important, prayer. Develop a regular habit of family prayer. And that includes, if you have children, include them, but there should be a time when mom and dad are alone and go to God together and pray together. It's very important. It's a cohesion. It holds things together, because it's hard to hold a grudge when you're before God talking about your mate kneeling next to you and what they did. Being honest and truthful and taking it to God and praying for forgiveness, for wisdom, for help, for insight, for all the guidance that is necessary to untangle from whatever the issues may be before they get worse. The old adage that a family that prays together stays together is true. As simple as that is, it's true without a doubt. And so it's important that we do indeed keep this in mind. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 6, we are told, be careful for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. Together. Take time to do it together. And I'm emphasizing together, because so often as years go by, we don't emphasize the fact that we should be praying together. So that's important, brethren, that we understand that there's a responsibility there in order to hopefully level the playing field in our marriages so that they are indeed peaceful. Colossians, just a few pages over, chapter 4, and in verse 2, we read this. Continue in prayer, and watch in the same with thanksgiving, with all praying also for us. And he goes on and talks about how we should be praying for the ministry. But again, prayer in the context of marriage is an important ingredient in keeping things together. 1 Thessalonians, just a few pages over, chapter 5, verse 17. You should have this one basically memorized. Pray without ceasing. Pray without ceasing. Pray for your children's success. Pray for your grandchildren's success. It's a hard world out there, brethren. It is a very hard world, and it's not always easy for our young people to navigate because of all the pressures and the stresses that are upon them as young people, temptations included. So keep that in mind as well. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7, very important equation. This is an important barometer. 1 Peter 3 verse 7, we covered this, I think, in part 1, but it merits repeating. Likewise, you husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge, meaning the ladies, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, and being heirs together of the grace of life. Why? That your prayers be not hindered. If you can't be responsible in the little things, how can you expect to be responsible in the bigger things? And the bigger things you're being groomed for is to rule the world as kings and priests. So it's important that we're able to get along with our wife, that we're able to get along with our husband, that somehow we got to find this compatibility grounding to where, you know what, let's keep this in perspective because we represent God in this institution. See, God's been taken out of marriage, brethren. And sadly, we're all part and parcel to the rhetoric and the propaganda that marriage is just a contract. It's something that you can go in and out of and have your way with more mates than you know what to do with. And there have been people, we've had ministers in the Church of God International that were married 4 and 5 times. And I suppose they were giving marital counseling. That's the truth. So bottom line is, we've got to be able to understand we are in an institution that God defined and created from the day of creation, Adam and Eve. And it's incumbent on all females, incumbent on all males who are married with them to treat them rightly and fairly and well, so that in this case, the prayers of those that are involved in that relationship are indeed not hindered. Back a few pages over to 1 Timothy for a moment. 1 Timothy and chapter 2. Chapter 2 and in verse 8. I will therefore that men, Paul is telling Timothy, this young evangelist, he says, I will therefore, Timothy, that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands, without anger and no doubting. If you're going to pray, have faith that God will indeed, as was said, I think in the song service, if He's for you, who can be against you? So we need to have faith in our dealings with each other, and especially in our relationships with our mates. But as I said, you can extrapolate and extend out and apply a lot of what we've been talking about to any relationship. Because I would hope at work you want peace, don't you? At work you want peace. You want to get along with your boss. You want to get along with your coworkers. So how do you do that? Well, you've got to make adjustments because there's a variety of personalities you've got to deal with. And some you have to deal with more intimately. Others, it's not all that, close, and therefore it takes a different type of adjustment. But in all due respect, each person, each relationship, and it extends, like I said, into marriage, but outside of marriage, requires all of us to make adjustments. I call them audibles. You know, you're under center, you think a pass is going to work, and all of a sudden you see a defense line up and you don't like it, and so you call an audible. Because guess what? That play isn't going to work in these circumstances. And so you make the adjustment and do what you have to do in order to maximize the gain that you're hoping for. So it's important, brethren, that in all these relationships that we do the best we can to achieve the compatibility and generate the peace to make our lives a lot easier, simply because, brethren, Christian families are under attack. Fatherhood is under attack. You know it as well as I do, things are at a high tension in respect to families. We've redefined families. As I said before, I'm not going to make a big deal out of it, but two men don't define a family in that respect. Oh, they define a relationship for sure, a civil relationship for sure. But family, as God has defined it in His Bible, is very clear. And that is the best arrangement that human beings can expect to have in order to have peace in their lives as they progress in life through their maturing factions and factors. As I said, some of these things are compounded in the society that we're living in by young parents, and that creates a volatility, and as a result, in many respects, doesn't really serve in cherishing the family because they're too young to really appreciate and or make the adjustments necessary to recognize what the solutions are. And that's why young people, it's so important that you take the time to evaluate who you're going to mate with, who you're going to, as they say, marry for the rest of your life until death do you part, because that's what marriage is about. Till death do you part in that regard. And so remember, marriage, it's like a garden. It really is like a garden. It takes a lot of hard work. It takes weeding, and then sometimes it takes watering. Other times it might take a lot of happiness and benefit because you're able to enjoy the fruits of your labor in terms of companionship and togetherness and all the happy experiences that certainly marriage can bring to all of us. And children, they certainly will benefit from that, and in generations and upon generations later on will hopefully, as the generations grow and your children have children, the evil is buffered. I mentioned the fact that there are certainly demonic influences that follow families until certain patterns are broke to generate new cycles in those families. Alcoholism, other types of addictions that follow the thread, that follow that bloodline. And it's due to the fact that nobody breaks rank. Nobody breaks rank from the habitual patterns of the generations preceding of that particular family. It's important we break those patterns, brethren. It's important that you stay on track and break those patterns so that they're not repeating the cycles that have wreaked such havoc down through the generations previous. So important. And you that are married, don't tire in well-doing. Do not tire in well-doing. Be prepared to work. Embrace the fact, the idea that you're going to have to work at your marriages. There's going to be ups, there's going to be downs. There could be accidents, illnesses, things that come up in your lives that are going to cause you to basically have to take care of a whole different set of circumstances. I talked to you about the dialysis world that I came out of in water treatment, where mates would actually abandon the other mate who was on the dialysis machine because they said, hey, I didn't sign up for this, I'm not doing this. And they cut and run. And, you know, that's the way it was. They just couldn't handle the stresses and the pressures that dealt with putting a needle in the arm and putting them on a machine every 2 days, every 3 days, depending on whether they were in hemodialysis or peritoneal. So, fact of it is, we are vulnerable in many respects. We're breakable. We catch diseases. We can certainly end up experiencing things that are life-changing. And what we need to recognize in our marriages is, guess what? We're in this together. We're in this together. So that's important to recognize and to understand, and we need to be clear about this. I got it in my notes here. I got it underlined. Be clear about this. Ready? Be clear about this. I just read my notes. Tell everybody don't read your notes, but I just read them. It says here, treat your mate as you, and your children, by the way, treat your mate and your children as you want to be treated. Real simple. That's the royal law. It's in the book of James. That's the royal law. Do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. You've heard that before. In the context of marriage, treat your mate as you would want to be treated. Because if indeed you're just going to scream and yell and blame and so on, how would you like them to be doing that to you? So somebody's got to be an adult in the room and stop that and be able to get off that track, off that thread, and do the right thing to bring the peace back into the family unit. So these are the basic 5 pillars. In summary, they are, just real quickly, realize we're all sinners. That was pillar number 1. Pillar number 1, realize we're all sinners. Pillar number 2, consider each other has her and his role, R-O-L-E, role. Pillar number 3, learn forgiveness. No grudges, out of bounds, penalty. Learn forgiveness. Pillar 4, today we've covered, be helpful and positively reinforcing. Give credit where credit is due. Compliment each other once in a while. If something is really worth mentioning, mention it and give credit to the individual for their accomplishment. Make prayer, pillar number 5, make prayer a regular habit in your marriage. And yes, it's been said, you remember this statement, a happy wife, a happy life. Maybe. Maybe. But I say this. Consider this. A happy husband and wife produces exceptional family life. That's important. To make only one happy is not fair, not fair. It's got to be equal. If there's 2 of you, hopefully there's not 3, if there's 2 of you, it's got to be fair. It's got to be fair. So a happy husband's got to be included, ladies, and guys, a happy wife. And that will indeed produce exceptional family. That's important, that a marriage develops into a happy family. That makes a healthy congregation, by the way, here at church. If we have happy families, guess what? We have a happy congregation. It's just a natural outgrowth of that very reality, if indeed we're working hard at it. So keep that in mind, brethren, and hopefully we'll all have happy marriages that will produce happy families that will indeed produce, as an outgrowth, happy communities. And we will then contribute to the change from evil in this country to righteousness, if indeed it can be done.